So you had a question about economies of scale. Good question. It's a very important concept. And what it means is basically that when you do something on a larger scale, when you do a lot of it, you can do it more efficiently. That's not always true, but it's very frequently true. And for an example, let's suppose you're making an apple pie. Well, if you're just making one and it's the first time you've ever done it, you'd have to look up a recipe online. You'd have to read through it carefully. You might have to look up some terms you don't understand. Then you'd have to go through your kitchen, see which of the ingredients you have, make a list of stuff that you need to buy at the store. You take a trip to the store, you buy the ingredients that you need, you come home, and then you sort of carefully follow the recipe. You might make some mistakes because you're inexperienced at it, and you have to heat your whole big oven just for one pie. You get a pie, but it's not a very efficient process. It'll probably take you some time. It might take you a little bit more money than you would have needed to spend, and the quality of the pie is probably not going to be absolutely top-notch. Now, suppose you're making two. Well, you have to cut twice as many apples. That part's twice as long, but you can take just one trip to the store. You don't have to read the recipe twice as many times. You can heat the oven only once. Probably that part hardly costs any more than it did for two pies than it did for one. So you see, it's just becoming more efficient. The second pie doesn't take as much extra effort as the first pie did. And if you made 50 pies, then now you get really good at it. You get really fast. You can maybe buy some stuff in bulk, save yourself money that way. Your oven stays hot, and you can put maybe 5 pies in it at a time, or however many it fits in there. So the average cost of producing each pie would get a lot cheaper. So in general, some reasons for economies of scale, the reasons why we observe them would be division of labor, and this can be especially important if you think about a factory. Think about how things are done in a factory. Factories make things really cheaply. If you walk into the store, many of the goods are going to be made in a factory, and the prices on them will be much lower than what you would have to be paid to do the same thing. If you tried to make yourself all of the goods that you can buy in the store, some of you couldn't make at all, but even the ones you could make, you'd make it much less efficiently than the factory does. So what does the factory do that makes it so much more efficient? Well, for one thing, it divides labor. So it would split the task of making a good into many, many, many little tiny tasks, and then each worker just has to do that thing over and over again. And if you do something over and over again, you get really good at it. The factory will also have specialized capital equipment. We can think about this even in the pie case. So if you're going to make 50 pies, it might be worth your while to buy an apple peeler. They have these devices that are specially for peeling apples. If you buy one of those, then you can peel apples a lot faster than if you just do it with a regular knife. It's not really worth it if you're just making one pie, but if you're making 50, it might be worth investing in that. And the other thing is information. So as you do a task more often, you start learning it, you get better at it. There's an initial training period for any worker who starts in a factory. They will have to be trained in doing a particular job. And depending on the job, it might take years to train. Maybe they have to get a whole education in, or maybe they can be trained in 5 minutes by a coworker. But even if that's the case, they probably won't be really good at the task right away. So what you do is you break down the job into lots of tasks, and that economizes on learning. Henry Ford's production line is a famous example of economies of scale, because making a car is really complicated, but Henry Ford, by breaking it down into really small steps, made it into something that ordinary workers could do, and that made cars much cheaper. He was able to produce them much more efficiently because he was doing it at a very large scale. And this is true in all kinds of different industries. This is sort of a graphical representation of economies of scale. So if you think, as your quantity increases, your average cost is going down. That would be characteristic of an economies of scale industry. There are some limits on this. If you produce at too large a scale, sometimes you actually get sort of higher overhead costs, higher management costs. Also, distribution can get more expensive because you have to ship the goods further. If you're producing them in one location and then shipping them very far, at some point, then all those shipping costs start piling up. So there are some limits on it, but most production processes are characterized by economies of scale.